Hi, this is your Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at Open Source Summit in Denver, Colorado. And today we have two guests, Karim Marucchi, CEO at CrowdFavorite, and Joost de Valk, partner at Emilia Capital. Joost, Karim, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to host you, both folks here. Before we talk about the main topic today, which is, of course, Fair Package Manager project. Before that, I would love to know a bit about, the company CrowdFavorite, and then, of course, I will talk to you to learn about the Emilia Capital. So let's start with the company.
Absolutely. So CrowdFavorite was originally founded to install and customize WordPress for the enterprise. So over the years, we've done everything from TechCrunch to Disney, AT&T, different companies like that. And today we are one of the premier customizers of the software within the Fortune 500.
Excellent. And let's talk about the Emilia Capital.
So I'm before I started Emilia Capital, I founded a company called Yoast, which built a Yoast SEO plugin for WordPress. We sold that in 2021. Made some money and started investing into the WordPress space. So been doing that for the last 4 years, mostly because actually in the WordPress space, there's relatively little investment into small companies growing up new stuff. So that's what I started doing together with my wife.
And Yoast is one of the most SEO, if you look at the project, for the SEO, by default. So is the name came from your name?
That is from my name. If I have to give one piece of advice today, it would be not to name your company after yourself, because if you end up selling your company, someone else ends up owning your name. But yeah, no, Yoast SEO is a quite successful product. We sold it to Newfold Digital in 2021. At that time, we had about 12 million websites using it. And I think right now it's at 13, 14 million websites running that software. But yeah, it's a quite successful open source project.
No, I didn't know. So actually, it add one more kind of, exciting element to this discussion today, which actually creates a very good segue to the Fair Package Manager. Looking at your roots, when you actually introduced yourself, I had something in the backup, but I didn't want to ask. I hey, that may be unrelated altogether. So I would like to start that the Fair Package Manager project. Talk about the origin of the project, where and why it started.
WordPress has historically, WordPress is a 22-year-old open source project, right? And it has historically always worked in a way where every WordPress site connects to WordPress.org to get its updates for WordPress itself, its plugins, its themes, its translations, and a whole lot more. Over the course of the end of last year, there was a lot of kerfuffle in our industry when there were a couple of things that happened. At one point, WordPress.org decided to block one of the biggest hosts in the WordPress ecosystem from accessing WordPress.org, which prevented all of their customers from updating their plugins, themes, and WordPress itself. And then a couple days, weeks later, one of the plugins on WordPress.org, so an independent open source project, was taken over and supplanted by a fork of that project by the WordPress.org owner as well. And at that point, we, as an ecosystem, all began looking like, hey, we know that we weren't always happy with how governance in the WordPress ecosystem worked and how the wider WordPress ecosystem was run. But we really started going like, hey, we need other solutions. I was looking at it from an investment perspective, like this is an entirely unsafe ecosystem to invest in. And Karim had similar problems.
With my day-to-day clients, we had major Fortune 50 clients saying, how can we trust an open source project that can just decide to replace code? What happens if they didn't decide to actually announce it publicly? It's a supply chain security nightmare, and this must be fixed.
And we were not alone. There were quite a few people that were talking about this, and were different groups that were forming like, hey, we need to do something else. And we both wrote a blog post at the end of December last year where we said, hey, we need this to change, and we have an idea of how to change this. Because we could afford to be public about this, a lot of people started contacting us, and we luckily were able to connect all these groups together and with all of us together decide like, hey, we're going to move this forward in one direction, which is where we started with FAIR. So FAIR technically is both a protocol and an implementation of that protocol, which replaces WordPress.org. All these hosts started setting up mirrors when this happened, but all those mirrors were built by themselves and were basically still dependent on WordPress.org. And what we did with FAIR is that all these mirrors become repositories of themselves and they connect to each other. So we have this federated network where if one of the nodes is cut off from access to WordPress.org, we can actually route around that, like the internet, and create a more stable version of our supply chain for everyone. In doing so, we've also actually fixed a lot of other problems that we have in the WordPress ecosystem. So historically, themes and plugins were only findable in the WordPress admin if they were hosted on WordPress.org. We've built a new aggregator service that actually allows plugins and themes to be hosted outside of WordPress.org, which allows for an entire commercial ecosystem to be created on top of that, which did already exist a bit, but it was very hard to be found by users because you could not be found in the WordPress admin. If they searched for a plugin, they would only find the free plugins on WordPress.org, but they couldn't find the commercial plugins. So in all of that, FAIR is a project, a protocol, a client, a server, and well, it's a lot of work. So today on stage, we announced, hey, we're setting up a foundation with the Linux Foundation to get funding for all that work we're doing and to make sure that we can govern this together with the wider ecosystem so that instead of the one entity that now controls WordPress.org, we'll replace that with actual governance that, well, allows us all to decide together where we take this.
I remember early days, Drupal used to be there, Joomla used to, there are a ton of them, and WordPress was infamous for being the most insecure one. Also because it was less about insecurity, but a lot of users were there on. But the way Drupal was overly complicated, to run Drupal, you need a whole data center to run Drupal. So, but then you folks, as you also rightly mentioned, auto updates, which made because a lot of folks were not updating, they're like 5 generations behind those plugins. And it went to the same old software supply chain. The patch was there, it was never applied. But
I think that we've not entirely fixed that problem yet, but
no,
we
what
are
I'm saying
better
is
now.
but the open source get the bad rap. People don't think that, hey, the patch was not applied. The news cycle will say, hey, you know what, the biggest vulnerability found on WordPress. No, it was fixed, but nobody applied the patch. Can you talk about, first of all, when you conceptualized the FAIR project, first of all, the FAIR is in uppercase. Is there any specific connotation meaning behind the name as well?
Yeah. So FAIR stands for Federated and Independent Repositories. And the idea was, when we first started talking, we were seeing the reaction of what was happening with WordPress.org. The hosts were putting up these mirrors, and each individual host was doing their own technology to do that. And with an open source project that has 40% of the web today, imagine each different host having different ways to do updates. The problem you were just speaking about would get worse and worse, and you wouldn't have the same experience across all the hosts. So the conversation we had, and then brought in other groups as well, was how do we make it so we can create a common foundation that keeps the open source project together?
One thing is also unique about WordPress is that, of course, I can host it on Akamai, I can host it on DigitalOcean, wherever I want. And then WordPress.com, you can get, full, what is the involvement of automatic, is it automatic, right? With the project, or not yet they are involved?
They're not involved yet. We'd love them to be.
We've invited them.
We've invited them, but yeah, so far there's been no real response. Of course, there is a bit of a struggle there in that there are a lot of entities around WordPress, There's Automatic. There's the founder of WordPress, who's also the CEO of Automatic and the leader of the project, who's also the owner of WordPress.org, which is his private website. So there is a lot of, stuff around that makes it harder for the wider ecosystem to do this properly, which is actually one of the problems that we're running into as well. Because with the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe coming up, the fact that WordPress.org is a privately owned website, which is not an open source foundation, is actually a problem. So we needed to fix that. We do fix that in large part with what we've built with FAIR and what we're building with FAIR, because not all of it's done yet. The protocol is pretty much okay, but not all of the code has been written to do all the federation. But we needed to tackle a lot of these problems where you could, in WordPress right now, you can't mark an update as a security release. In WordPress right now, it's not required to have a security point of contact when you submit a plugin. These are relatively simple things, but they've not been done in the project because, nobody cared enough to do them. Even though the tickets have been there and people have been I myself have been trying to get those tickets through.
For years.
For years, and now we're getting to the point where we're getting close, and we need to fix all of that. And luckily, the FAIR team, which is a very large team, and it's definitely not just us, there's 50 developers in our core group and about 200 developers around that are building stuff right now. And luckily, we can tackle a lot of those problems and make our ecosystem better.
We're very lucky that the hosting companies are starting to test our current version, our MVP, and the tests are coming out very positive. They're giving us great feedback, and we're looking forward to later this summer having a finalized version with the AT protocol that is just amazing.
So we use, in WordPress, slugs used to be the identifier for what the plugin was. And you can only do that if you're only hosting those plugins in one place, because then you can control that slug is unique. So what we do, the bit that we've taken from the AT protocol, so we've taken their DIDs, and we're actually using those to uniquely identify plugins, and then also the keys that come with that to sign the software. So we've actually introduced code signing, which we never had for plugins and themes in WordPress before. We've been talking about that for a decade, but it was never implemented. And we can now do all those things. And this means that if you have a DID for your plugin, the DID points to where your plugin is hosted. So if your plugin is hosted at WordPress.org now, that's perfectly fine. And then if your plugin is hosted somewhere else suddenly, because someone took over or because you thought that was a better idea, you can change it in the DID where the update is coming from. And you can just fix that without basically transparently for the end user. We think it's a very good concept. And it's also why, as I said pre-show to you, I think that in the end, FAIR could actually be used for more projects, because this is a thing that in itself is a technical advancement that we could use for other open source CMSs or other systems as well.
I will talk about that aspect because that is kind of a typical open source story. Linux kernel was created, Linux module to solve its own problem, but it's powering the world. Before I go there, I also want to talk about, when you're talking about that it's not just a small team. First of all, it's a new project, under Linux Foundation. It will grow depending on how it grows. I also want to talk about the involvement of Automatic, because early days, a lot of companies, they did not get involved with open source, but later on, now you see a lot of the, big names on the industry are there. So eventually we might see Automatic also there. But if you look at the ecosystem users, a lot of big players who are running their website, they go to WordPress.com because very easy. They don't have to deal with, they just use it as a SaaS. Generally, that is the perception there. Can you also talk about, when we talk about WordPress.org, where companies are hosting there? So what is the criteria where big organizations, they choose to have full control and they choose to have self-hosted versus other hosted? I just want to understand the scope of the problem so that we can also see how we can see the ecosystem grow in future.
So one of the problems we have is the word WordPress is used in very many different ways, right? So to make it simple, WordPress.org isn't hosting. It's just the underlying infrastructure for installing packages, modules, plugins in our parlance, themes, templates, translations, and a lot of other things around that. There is no hosting. It's just that. WordPress.com, owned by Automatic, is hosting of one segment of websites. They also have VIP hosting for the enterprise, and they have a few other projects and companies along that line. So there's the hosting side, and then there's the open source side. The open source side, WordPress.org, is what we're hoping to evolve. Right? So it's outside of Automatic's purview from the way they run their business. It is the founder, Matt Mullenweg, who has been running WordPress.org. But we feel it's time for an evolution for the size of this ecosystem to be able to make it easier for the edge, where we're all competing, as opposed to the core where we're supposed to be collaborating, for that edge to start being able to understand how to interact with this infrastructure.
Just one more clarity before move forward. When I look at it, WordPress.org, I look at it, that is the upstream. Even WordPress.com is a kind of downstream, and it's...
Yeah, WordPress.com is a relatively... So WordPress.com is not small, but WordPress.com is a relatively small
exactly.
part
I want
of
to
all...
make those people confused.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that, even
so
WordPress.com is a downstream.
Yeah. So when you look at the market share of WordPress, WordPress is about 40% of websites on the web. In those numbers, WordPress.com is counted as one website.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All the others are WordPress.org installs on web hosts around the world, or on AWS, or on all these other where people run it themselves. So the vast majority of WordPress sites are self-hosted WordPress sites, where self-hosted can mean many things to many people.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Because the difference is that I can self-host on Akamai's Linode,
Right.
And then Akamai Linode also offers managed WordPress hosting.
Yes,
so now
correct.
they are the one, they will managing everything for you. So when you are building this community, so the whole ecosystem will have these kind of players also who are doing the managed work. So can you give us what kind of community around FAIR project will look like?
Well, I think that our hope is that all of those hosts that offer WordPress hosting, whether it's completely self-hosted, managed, or something else, will use FAIR as an underlying framework. Right now, if you install FAIR, there's a plugin that you can already install and try it, and you'll see that it's, for the end user, pretty transparent.
Nothing changes.
Because it just works. And no user sees that the URL where the zip file is coming from is no longer WordPress.org, but it's a FAIR URL. That, for end users, doesn't really matter. And end users also don't have to be bothered by all of this. Most of them hardly know that they use WordPress, right, let alone how they get WordPress. And I think that's a good thing, because it's a level of technical complexity that they don't have to understand. I think the beauty of WordPress is that it's relatively easy to use, and that's something that we should definitely keep, which is why we chose this approach where we can change the governance around a large part of the ecosystem without breaking up the ecosystem and basically ripping it in two.
Yeah, you don't have to be an engineer to drive a car. Right? It's a
Exactly.
make it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about crowd favorites. Of course, you mentioned earlier the involvement. From your perspective, you also mentioned pain points.
Yes.
How do you want to see this project evolve over time?
So the beautiful thing is this is a tool for hosts and other organizations. For instance, you could be a large university and you could create a public node that's available for anybody to be able to get updates and packages from the university, just like regular Linux, right? In other places, you might have a large international enterprise company, like a big entertainment company, who says, I have tens of thousands of WordPress sites behind my firewall, so I want to create a private node just to update my own servers. So that way I know the provenance of my own code. And that will dramatically reduce even further the total cost of ownership, because today they're doing upgrades and patches with containers. And that takes developer hours. Developers don't want to be doing updates. We already have an update system. Let's evolve it so that we can use it in the enterprise. And that's the pain point.
At some point, will the package manager also start hosting, or that will remain with the WordPress?
So we do plan to allow for some hosting on our main server at some point, but we don't necessarily even need that, because in the way it currently already works, we could allow a plugin to be hosted on GitHub and update straight from GitHub. Because there's really no reason for us to host those ourselves. Well, all that we need to do is aggregate where all these things are and get the metadata so that we can show them to users in search results. But we don't need the actual files. We don't need to host those ourselves.
But then you won't have any control about the security, and because that will still your own,
You touch on a point that's, of course, like what you immediately need on top of that is a moderation layer, where you can say, hey, these packages are unsafe. All of that we're currently working on, and we have this spec'd out. This is very possible, actually, in very similar ways to how Blue Sky and other AT protocol things already do some of this as well. So it's a different way of moderation, because you're basically using deny lists or saying, hey, don't use these, do use these. This brand is really who it says it is. This plugin comes from Yoast.blog and is really claimed as such, and we can verify, because we've signed the packages, that it's actually that thing. But there's update security, and then there's new install security. Like, how do you figure out that there's not like 10 different versions of a certain plugin and that only one of them is real? Those are things we have solutions for, but they're fairly technical, and honestly, I can't even really fully explain them. But there is stuff there that we're working on, and that it will take a bit of time, and it will take moderation, as it does right now on WordPress.org too.
And I'd like to answer your question a different way as well. Right now, we have one company without checks and balances making all these decisions. So one entity. So imagine, pick your 5 favorite hosting companies that have a good reputation. Imagine that all of them are running nodes and they're trusted. One of them decides to go off in a different direction or do something that's untrusted or go offline. There's 4 others. And this becomes exponential. So you have a check and balance system. And the reason why we came to the Linux Foundation is to have open, transparent governance with checks and balances, so that we could work with Linux Foundation members to actually make sure that this is being governed correctly.
The Linux Foundation actually already has projects around package management. Yeah. So we were like, we can invent all of this stuff ourselves, which honestly the WordPress world has been very good at doing the last 20 years. We've been very isolationist, doing a lot of stuff ourselves in our ecosystem. And we want to break that open and actually collaborate more with the wider open source ecosystem to fix a lot of these things.
When you're talking about moderation earlier, what does it mean for a user, like flagging something that it is not safe? If I'm running a WordPress website, as you already said, a majority of WordPress users, of course, they're big organizations, they use it. And then there are a lot of mom and pop shops, they are running a small business. They don't even log into the system, that what is going on there. Even if the package is flagged, they don't know. So they are still running. So
no, but honestly, right now, that situation is the worst. So we can block a plugin on WordPress.org for having a security plugin. And if you log into your site and look at your plugins page, you would see absolutely nothing.
No information.
There's no information that plugin is no longer getting updates. There's no information that plugin was closed for security reasons. You don't know.
Fair protocol changes.
We change that, and we actually give that feedback to the admin. So at that point, you can actually see, hey, this plugin was closed for security reasons. And you can actually say, hey, maybe I have to replace this with something else. But right now within WordPress, this is a deep and utter failure of WordPress itself, in my opinion. Like, we don't show you that. We literally don't give you that information.
Can I just take it to the next level from the user's perspective?
Yeah.
That if a user logs into an admin, I'm running an Etsy website where I sell something. I never log into backend. I just go put a blog post that new things are there. So how do they get? I mean, I'm just getting too much into details here, but this is the problem you're trying to solve either way.
Yeah.
So if they log in and then they find out, then you have already lost a lot of battle because they have.
I agree. I would love for us to actually fix that and say, hey, you know what? We'll send you an email when a plugin.
That's what I'm heading. That if I'm running, I should get an email. I get email from Gmail all the time. Hey, you have not enabled the two-factor authentication. I get 3 times.
And I agree. And that's
a long-term. I want to understand. Yeah, please go ahead. But I want to understand this bigger vision also you have.
And that's why it's so important to work with the hosts.
Exactly.
Because they own the customer. They own the end user.
And they want this too.
So they want to be able to give better service to the end users. And what we're trying to do is come up with this common standard for those hosts to be able to do it easily without all having different infrastructures.
What are your immediate goals? The good thing is the Linux Foundation has a very good structure for governance, so I don't want to talk about the technical committee, that procedure is there. But what is your immediate goals? Hey, this is what we need to do now in 1 or 2 months, and then this is what we want to achieve. When we kind of celebrate our anniversary, that we look back and we say, hey, this is what we achieved. So what is your vision looks like?
So immediately over the next month or so, we have an open call to the Linux Foundation member companies to come and join us to help create the check and balance system. Then by the end of summer, we're hoping to have a 1.0 version that has already been, these current versions have already been tested by hosts, but the 1.0 version, we're confident is going to be enough for hosts to actually start distributing this to their end users. And a year from now, we're hoping that we've created enough of an ecosystem, these partnerships with these hosts and these large organizations, that we have a truly decentralized, federated way to evolve the ecosystem to make more possible business and code and evolution of where WordPress is than it has in the last 10 years.
Now, whatever you explained, thank you for that. It is all look like doing something because you saw a problem. It's more or less like, just voluntary, make it better. Now, CRA is coming, and, all the companies you mentioned you are from Europe, either way, it won't be any, and just act of, we'll make it secure. So what impact do you see of CRA and how you see that actually creating fair packaging actually very well aligns, because then companies will fear for big fines. So can you talk about the relevance of this project from that perspective?
Well, it's actually why hosts are already engaging with us now as well. They need this. They need this to be fixed because this is an existential threat to WordPress itself. And honestly, right now, I think the way that WordPress.org is set up right now without FAIR, it is an existential threat to itself. And with FAIR, we fix that. And we allow all these hosts to do that. So I'm very confident that European hosts, first of all, but more hosts in the wider ecosystem, because let's be honest, CRA is European now, but we will probably have similar laws like that in the rest of the world very soon. Everyone needs this. Everyone needs better supply chain security. Everyone needs open source to actually be open source and governance in a way that we all agree. Can all agree that it's open source and not one person's project. And so I expect that a lot of our hosts will actually do this because it's good business for them, not because they think it's ethically better or something else. It's just a better business decision.
And the way WordPress.org stands today, I couldn't use WordPress for my enterprise clients because I would end up being responsible in the CRA. And we know that type of legislation will eventually also come to the United States, and it's going to go worldwide. This is needed for the evolution of open source.
In the morning, I was talking to OpenSSF, and I have been tracking CRA. I mean, there are already things in China, India, in US, California, they already have some things like that. So that will become reality. I always give analogy from the automobile industry. You don't buy a car and they're like, we will install brakes and airbags later on. No. So with the software, that should be, those things should be baked in before it leaves the door, not afterthought.
And I actually also think that it's an opportunity for open source in general, because all of these things bring back the idea of owning your own data, owning your own software, being able to change what you do and where it goes, and not being reliant on one company or individual. And I think that is a chance for all of us to actually bring back the whole open source ethos and say, hey, SaaS is a nice solution, but it actually has problems too. And they're becoming very apparent in all of these things. So I think that there's a golden age of open source ahead of us to actually, do this all together. And it's one of the things why I'm very excited for us to join the Linux Foundation, so that we can do all of that together way more.
Karim, Yoast, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really important discussion because even our website runs on WordPress. So we know the pain point. It's self-hosted on Akamai. So, but the thing is they do take good care of it. So I do know the nuances when I talk to my team, they talk about, and also when you're a tech journalist, that's why you become tech journalist, right? Because you want to go into so it's really
very good
to bring this point that people are not aware of.
Yes.
And I do hope and wish that Automatic will eventually join, because we have seen in past.
So do we.
Because we need to build a very secure ecosystem around some of these most widely used technologies. But I really appreciate your effort to create this project, and also to learn about your history as well with the Yoast project. Now I know. And as you mentioned that your next step is to call for other parties to join. I would love to sit down with you if a video can help to broadcast this message. And then when the first release is ready, we'd love to talk about that, which means that there's a lot to talk about. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.